Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Return to Work session with the Medical Alley Association. My name is Frank Gisculti. I'm your VP of Intelligence here at the Association. I want to thank you for spending a little bit of your morning here with us. As so many members have asked about what are best practices for returning to work, for creating a safe environment, and for staying compliant, we want to make sure to bring you information and insight that can help you do your job a bit better, but also give you forums to share your insights and your experiences with other members and with our policymakers who are driving a lot of this activity. So I'm very pleased today that we're going to have a wonderful discussion with two great speakers who are going to share a little bit about their work and their experiences and give us a chance to ask some questions and share our experiences. So today we have Nicole Blissenbach, who's the Assistant Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. And then we also have Diane Rucker, who's the Executive Director of University Enterprise Laboratories. And as we go to each of them, I'll let them do their own intros because it'd be far better than what I could give. As we're going through this, if you have questions, please use the chat function. My colleague Erin, she'll grab the questions, make sure I see them, and we'll bring them up as we go through. Ask questions at any time. And as we go through this, please stay engaged. All right, and with that, let's get started. I'm gonna switch from the screen sharing over to the speaker view, and I'll start with Nicole. And Nicole, if you wouldn't mind giving us just a quick intro on yourself and what you do.
Sure. Good morning, and thanks for having me. So my name is Nicole Blissenbach. I'm an Assistant Commissioner at the Department of Labor and Industry. In that role, my primary role is to do compliance and enforcement strategies. So I've been with the department for about a year, a little over a year now. Came on with the current administration. And prior to that, I worked at Education Minnesota, the union representing educators around the state, for 10 years as an attorney, and prior to that at a private law firm. So my background is as a labor and employment attorney, and came to the department with kind of that enforcement focus, and primarily working with our labor standards department and our OSHA department currently. So that's kind of my background. Happy I've been, through this pandemic, been working very closely with other agencies on the administration's response, and happy to talk about an area DLI has been very involved in, which is the preparedness plans for businesses. So happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And we'll come back to you in a second. Diane, could you just do a quick intro of yourself and UEL, and then we'll go into the discussion.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Frank, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and we appreciate your spending your time with us as well. University Enterprise Labs is an incubator for startups, primarily startups that need lab space. In Minnesota, we have a space that's just in between Minneapolis and St. Paul, right off University Avenue in 280. We currently have 63 companies, might actually be 64. I think there's one more that just joined us. But as you can imagine, it's a very interesting challenge to work with that many different companies. We have over 350 people that typically work with us, and to keep everybody safe, and also to make sure that each company's preparedness plan keeps the other companies safe as well. So I'd say for most businesses, they're concerned about their employees, their vendors, their contractors, and keeping everyone safe. For us, we have a lot more people to think about. I've been with University Enterprise Labs for about 2 years, a little over that. And prior to that, I've been very active in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, working with startups, helping to grow startups in the state of Minnesota. My background is engineering, but moved into management roles much more quickly than I expected. So I also have an executive MBA from MIT Sloan, which is where I realized the potential of the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Minnesota. And that's been the work I've done for about the last 6 to 7 years. It's really an honor to work with startups. There's an incredible energy, but there's also a bit of chaos. So when we return to the preparedness plans, it's everyone from a one-person preparedness plan to 40 to 80 people. Much different challenges, and I'm very happy to be here to talk about it today.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. I think two really good perspectives that we'll have in this discussion. Nicole, maybe the place to start, really high level, probably the thing a lot of us have been digging into, but could you give us kind of the highlights of what the return to work preparedness plan is and what it needs to include and kind of the why of it?
Sure. So early on in the peacetime emergency, we all probably remember back, it seems like forever ago, many businesses were temporarily closed. And as we started looking at reopening different sectors of the economy, there were a lot of discussions about how do we help businesses prepare to bring workers back in the safest manner possible, because we had been hearing at the Department of Labor and Industry from workers, from worker organizations, labor unions, that the biggest concern was that people were afraid of getting sick. And in many cases afraid of returning to work because of they couldn't guarantee kind of that their employers were going to follow the proper protocol to decrease the opportunity for transmission in the work site. So as businesses were reopening, we started having conversations about, well, we know businesses need to follow CDC and MDH guidelines. We know that they need to comply with OSHA standards. So one of the ways to ensure that they were thinking through implementing all of those protocols was to have it in writing, to have that plan shared with employees, and to have them trained in it. So that would help increase, number one, employee confidence, number two, consumer confidence, if they knew that a business had thought through all of those different intricacies of how to keep both employees and consumers safe. So in that process, we at Department of Labor and Industry worked very closely with the Department of Health, and DEED, the Department of Employment and Economic Development, to get business input, employee input, to really make sure that this plan was something that could be used for all of the reasons I just mentioned. So the plans, initially it was only required for those, the non-critical sector businesses who were reopening. As time kind of went on and more people were reopening, we saw the usefulness of the plans. We saw how incredibly important it was for workers to have that training and that input into those plans. It became clear that requirements should extend to the critical sectors that had been open all along. And many of those businesses already had plans. They had written plans. It was very common to see them already have that. So with the executive order I think it came out in mid-June now, that extended that requirement to have a written preparedness plan to all businesses in Minnesota. And the plans can, depending on the type of business, depending on the type of industry, really need to address a number of different things. There are some core elements that are applicable to everyone. So the worker protections, outlining the people need to do when they're sick, what are the sick leave policies that are applicable to workers. That's one aspect. The worker and source control is another aspect that all plans need to address. Building and ventilation protocols, so that's outlined in the plans. Cleaning and disinfection protocols, communications and client or patient interactions, And now the most recent addition that all plans need to address is the addition of the face covering mandate for indoor public places. So there are additional things that, depending on an industry, need to be addressed. But so what we did in order to make sure that everybody was looking at all of these different considerations is we developed a plan template that kind of outlines and really puts forth kind of a best what we think applies to everybody, so that people could use that and kind of fill in the blank a little bit, and then add the industry specific areas that don't really apply to everybody, but may apply to your specific business. So that template is up on the staysafe.mn.gov website. And in addition to that, in consultation with the Department of Health, developed specific industry guidance. So everything from personal services like salons to manufacturing. And that specific industry guidance can be found on the staysafe.mn.gov website as well. In addition to all of the guidance, the template, which I believe now has been translated into numerous languages on that website, there's also an FAQ that addresses some of the most commonly asked questions that we receive related to the plan and the guidance. So I guess that's kind of a broad overview of what that is and where we are with that.
Thank you. And that was going to be one of my questions, with some of the resources available. And I'll mention to our attendees, we have a link to the Stay Safe website and all the different resources that the state of Minnesota has put out on the Medical Alley website. So if you're trying to find something, one click, you should be there. And I appreciate you mentioning that the documents are translated into multiple languages. We have many members who have facilities, especially on the manufacturing side, where they're multilingual employee bases, so it's extremely helpful to have. My next question would be something you alluded to. You mentioned getting questions. What have been some of the more common questions you're hearing from companies about developing a plan or implementing the plan?
Yeah, it's been, I would say that it's been interesting, and I don't often get the direct questions. We have been directing people in businesses and workers who have specific questions to our OSHA division. We have Minnesota has a state OSHA plan, so OSHA standards are enforced through the OSHA compliance division at the Department of Labor and Industry. So we also have in our OSHA, we have OSHA compliance, which is, what I think people typically think of when they think of OSHA. So they are the ones that do the inspections, can issue penalties. And then we have OSHA consultation, which they serve a little bit different role. They work with businesses and employers to help develop safety protocols. They have safety grants, so businesses can go out and get grants to increase their safety equipment or different safety items that an employer may need. And OSHA consultation has taken kind of the lead in answering business questions. So everything from, what do I do with the water cooler at work to, what are all of the required components in a plan? So I think that, I think the thing to remember is that these plans need to be really specific to your business. I know Diane mentioned earlier, the plan looks a lot different when you have one employee or two employees than it does when you have 4 or 5. We at the Department of Labor and Industry have our plan in place, and it is very complicated because we have everything from OSHA investigators to people who, sit at the front desk and work with the public as they come in. To people who never leave their office because they don't need to. Everything is done on the computer. So the plans are going to look different. They are going to have the same main categories, but they will look different. And a lot of those questions are that we receive are how to specialize the plan in order to work for particular businesses? That's what I would say are the primary questions we're getting.
And I can add to that, with with the 63 companies that we have, we get a lot of questions. I'd say the most common question has less to do with the preparedness plans and more to do with, have we had any cases reported in our building among the companies? And legally, we don't have any ability to ask that question. We've asked our companies to share that with us. We've been very fortunate. We've not had any reported cases over the time. But I think to the other point, UEL has had a number of businesses that were designated as essential. So we've been operating all the way through the planned shutdown time, not at full capacity. I would say probably about 10 to 15% of our companies were designated essential, but we've been gradually ramping that up as some of the restrictions have been relaxed. So for us, it was really about two things. It was about making sure that we had a preparedness plan in place at UEL that would kind of be a blanket plan on how we addressed the HVAC requirements, the sanitizing. And I saw a question on the water cooler, which I'll also mention as well. We typically have free coffee. Entrepreneurs run on caffeine very much. But we have unfortunately had to shut that down for the time period of the pandemic because a water cooler and a closed canteen location is one of the worst places to try to be socially distant. So we regret that, but we'll put that back in place when we can. We also have a communal candy dish that I've had a lot of people requesting return. And unfortunately, that's also been temporarily on hold. The water cooler discussion, or kind of returning back to that one, just to say, we do have some shared water. They're not fountains, they're water dispensers. And what we try to do on that is keep that, rather than having the discussion in place around those, have some signage around those that indicate very clearly, please take your water and move to a socially distant part of the building, which is very much not what we'd like to do. We'd like to be in the means of having face-to-face gatherings, having community gatherings. But for the safety and for the well-being of all of the employees that work at UEL, we need to keep that separation in place. So very quickly, the other questions that we've gotten have been on, do I need a plan if it's just me? And the answer is yes, you still do, because you as a business are operating in an environment in which other businesses are also operating. So whether you have one person or 5 people or 80 people, you still need to have a plan in place that outlines what you're going to do and how you're going to address it. The other thing I'd like to say is that the preparedness plans can't be static. We initially put ours out there when we had essential businesses working early in March. We adjusted them and revised them, published them to a wider audience back in April in anticipation of the stay-at-home order being lifted in early May, which was extended a couple weeks. And then we've revised them yet again and shared them on our website. And I think we actually need to post the most recent one, which is Executive Order 20-81. And that's requiring masks indoors. So prior to that point, we had a lot of signage in place. Masks are strongly recommended, but we couldn't actually say they're required because of the number of different groups that we have in our building. And I would say compliance has been pretty high despite that. Most of our businesses work in biotech and pharma, in food agriculture, or in med tech, and they understand very well when you need to be careful about masks. So that's been something very much in our favor, but we're amending our plans to reflect the latest executive orders.
And I should add, that is something that we are telling people to do, is to take a look at the preparedness plan and amend accordingly. Some industries already had face covering requirements, but look at that plan, amend accordingly to make sure you're in compliance with the most recent executive order. So, and I'll add one thing on the water coolers as well, because it is kind of funny how often that comes up. But you know, I think what you were referring to is one of the no-touch water dispensers, and that is what we're really recommending is that if the no-touch are easier, because you don't have you're not creating a high touch surface, which you would on one of the more traditional water coolers or in a coffee dispenser. So that's really where we're pointing people. And like you said, it's also kind of trying to eliminate those areas in an organization where people congregate. And we all know the water cooler jokes, and you know, it's an area that just brings people together. And unfortunately, that's not the safest thing right now. So
Wanted to come back to you'd mentioned OSHA, and if there were questions that were more appropriate for OSHA, can we find the contacts and the links for that on DLI's website, or where would you direct us?
yes, all of the contact information for any of our divisions, including OSHA, are on the DLI website. The OSHA emails are very easy. It's either osha.compliance@state.mn.us, if that's who you would contact if you're reporting a violation, or osha.consultation@state.mn.us. And that's the best place to contact if you have questions. And then, you know, just to kind of hit on the other areas that DLI really does have control over, we also have work comp. So if there are questions about work comp claims, that information can be found on our website. And then our labor standards division enforces labor standards laws in Minnesota, include, you know, wage and hour, state wage and hour laws, and leave laws. So we are getting a lot of questions from people about those areas. So available to answer any questions. There is contact information for labor standards as well on our website.
I mean, yeah, maybe if you can talk a little bit about that, if if you had sick employees or employees taking leave, like what are the things we should be thinking about or cognizant of relative to COVID that maybe we wouldn't have to think about in a normal environment?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest areas that businesses probably have heard about but may not know specifics that they need to know specifics on are the additional paid leave benefits that the federal government passed as part of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which applies to most public sector employers, but then also any private sector employers with less than 500 employees. And so what that did is basically provide for 2 weeks of paid leave for reasons related to COVID. So if you're under an isolation or quarantine order, your employer would have to provide 2 weeks of paid leave if they're an eligible employer, so under the 500 employees. And there are ways for that employer to then claim tax credits to get that money reimbursed from the federal government. But it's hard. I think a lot of employers, and what we're hearing from our federal counterparts at the US Department of Labor, who enforces that law, is that many employers don't understand that that is mandatory. It's not something you opt in or opt out of like employee leave policy would be. It's mandatory. So if an employee meets one of those reasons for the leave, they are entitled to the leave. And employers can't force an employee to use accrued leave before they use that leave provided under federal law. So we have been fielding a lot of questions in that area. And so that's just a common thing that comes up.
Thank you, really good to know. And I'll remind folks, if you have questions, pop them into the chat. The assistant commissioner is going to pop off in about 5 minutes here, and we'll shift over to a deeper dive into the UEL side. But if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. You know, maybe Diane, go ahead.
Very quickly, just I'll add that the resources available online have been invaluable to us and to our companies. And we initially started with the Department of Health templates, and have worked with the Department of Labor and Industry as well. But in terms of finding what you need online, there's really an extraordinary amount of information. I think one of the funniest plans that I read was for the one I alluded to, one of our startups with one employee who said, I will be communicating this to myself and making sure that I am in compliance with my plan. But all kidding aside, it's been helpful for us to request from all of our companies that they share their plans with us, not only so that we know they have one in place, but so that we can adapt and amend our plans if there are any changes that are needed.
Very good idea. Maybe my last question for you, Nicole, before we let you go here is kind of on the enforcement and the penalty side. So if I don't put a plan in place, or if I decide not to be compliant with it, what is my company looking at?
Yes, so I just want to make sure I'm not on mute. A couple different enforcement mechanisms included in the executive orders. So the requirement to have the written plan is a requirement that is through the executive order. So the failure to have a written plan is in and of itself a violation of that executive order. So that carries with it potential criminal penalties, potential enforcement by the AG's office. But I would say that the most likely is if OSHA receives any type of complaint or concern from an employee, the first thing OSHA will ask for is to see a copy of the plan. And that's how they're going to really go through and evaluate whether the proper protocols are being followed to make sure CDC, MDH guidelines are there and being followed, and OSHA standards. So that's most likely going to be the way that it's the realization comes that business does not have a plan. And so I would say that one of the most important parts about the plan is the requirement to share it with employees and to train them on the protocols that are included. And in fact, I would even take a step further and say that when developing the plan or when amending the plan, it's important to get employee input, because me in my role, I don't understand what every one of the 450 employees, what their day-to-day interactions look like. What every task they perform looks like. So if I get that input, I am more assured that my plan is taking into consideration all of the different variables that come up in a workday. So working with employees to hear their feedback, to work that into the plan, to address all the concerns they may have, having that worker confidence is really important and buy-in is important to really creating that safe workspace, so that we don't have outbreaks that we see, that we're doing everything that we can do to prevent that transmission at the workplace.
Right, and I'll add to that as well. There's been a number of changes in guidelines on how to protect ourselves and how to protect our employees. And having the plans in place, I think, provides some certainty to employees that you're on top of it, on top of what the latest recommendation is. And that's hard to do because the information keeps changing. UEL has been very fortunate in that we have a relationship with BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. And many of you have heard BARDA in the news just because they've been working with the federal government on COVID-19 compliance and recommendations, as well as actively funding vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics for COVID-19. So that gives us a little bit of earlier information in some cases, and a little bit of advance warning when things are going to change. That's been very helpful. It's been nice to know what we can anticipate through our work with BARDA, and then to try to share that with our teams and our companies as much as we can.
Very good. And Commissioner, I know you have to go, so I'll let you go. I want to say thank you very much for sharing a bit more on what DLI is doing and where some of the resources are. I'll remind our attendees that Stay Safe Minnesota website, you can find it linked through the Medical Alley website along with other resources. And we're going to shift now to talking more with Diane about how UEL and the UEL companies have developed their plans. So Commissioner, thank you and have a good day.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yes, most of those resources are on the Stay Safe website. You can also find things on the DLI website. And then any questions that come up about the most recent executive order on the face coverings, there is a link to the actual executive order, which I would encourage people to read, because there are some exceptions that people should be aware of, especially in kind of an office type environment. And so I would encourage people. And then there are some FAQs, both related to the industry guidance and related to the face covering executive order, that are all linked on that Stay Safe website. So, and as always, feel free to reach out to the department with any questions that you may have on any of these requirements, and we're happy to hear from you. But thank you so much for the opportunity, and look forward to maybe working with you again in the future.
Thank you, Nicole. It's been a pleasure to hear from you as well. Frank, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. It's going to happen once today. Now I feel. Let's talk a bit more about UEL. So that for our attendees, the reason I really wanted to have Diane with us, UEL has kind of a unique space and experience because they have so many different companies in their building that are big and small. So having to go through different experiences, manage through this in different ways. And so, Diane, maybe the first question I wanted to ask is, what have been some of the maybe differences you've seen in how the different UEL companies have approached this, given that you have one-person companies who's the person's being compliant with themselves, up to more established companies with more employees? What are some of those differences you've seen?
Well, I would say the more established companies with more employees, they're more likely to have very well clarified sets of policies, how they act, how they react in certain ways. So for them, in many cases, adding the COVID-19 preparedness plan was kind of an automatic outgrowth. This is part of our health and safety plan. This is part of what we already have. Let's amend it to be specific to COVID-19. I would say for the smaller companies, particularly the entrepreneurs and the early stage companies, they don't necessarily have a human resources or policy department. So this is potentially an individual or a couple of individuals getting together and saying, hey, we need this. How do we put this in place? What do we do? So I'd say there's been more questions from the companies that are early stage, that are starting out, on how to do it and how much they need and what they need to share with us than there have been from the more established companies. And just to put it in perspective, our smallest companies are 1 to 2 people. Our largest companies are 40 to 80. So it's a pretty significant difference in size. UEL is a central, it is a former Target warehouse that was converted to lab space. We have 33 labs in UEL. Some of those are shared labs. So within the shared labs, there needed to be some specific guidelines on how each company would protect the other companies with whom they were working. And then in the common spaces, that comes down to both their compliance with masks and social distancing, as well as our ability to maintain masks, social distancing by the structures that we set up and by the sanitizing and cleaning that we put in place.
What about, so with that many companies, you have people coming in and out, and I would imagine potentially the companies may have, probably fewer than normal, but visitors that are coming in and out of the labs. How does UEL manage that, and how does that play in with the companies?
Yeah, so normally our building is open to the public through business hours, and up through about mid-June, we had it closed to the public and card access only. So that was one way of controlling the number of visitors and contractors to the building, knowing that there would still be people that need deliveries of chemicals, that need support for services, that need just basic deliveries. But the requirement then was to have someone available to accept that delivery if they needed to have someone with access to the building. One other change that we've made is typically UEL receives packages in a standard mailroom for all of our companies. So it's kind of a nice, convenient way so you don't have to have someone there at whenever the FedEx or the UPS or the DHL person shows up. So we still receive packages, but we've asked all companies to authorize signatures on packages so that we don't have to have a personal signature for UPS and FedEx and so on. So essentially what that means is we receive it because we have a signed agreement on behalf of the company to accept the package. And then that's located in an open mailroom, and we've kept the doors open and do regular sanitizing to make sure that even though it's a shared space, that we limit the number of people that go in and out, and that we keep everybody safe as they're coming in to collect what they need.
You know, and I'd put this out to the attendees. If any of you are in co-working spaces, shared spaces, or other environments like that, you know, how have you dealt with some of those things? You know, go ahead and throw those in the chat. We'd be curious. Diane, I want to get back to your comment about, you know, with larger companies, they have people who can help build the plans, organize them, that sort of stuff. I'm just curious, how much time do you think has it taken you and UEL to put together its plan for return to work and for preparedness?
Yeah, I would say it's relatively quick. I mean, for most cases, if you have basic safety and health procedures in place, it's a matter of adapting them and amending them. And in a building the size that we have, in a space with so many people, we have these procedures in place. It's a matter of saying, let's do some extra sanitizing. Let's add a little bit more hand sanitizer. Hey, we're going to put this in every conference room in addition to everything. Hey, we're going to take out some of the chairs in the conference room because we don't want quite as many people to be able to gather. So I'd say, relatively speaking, it's been less work to set it up. I'd say you can probably set it up in maybe 30 minutes or so if you have something in place already. However, keeping it up, maintaining it is probably much more challenging. So our Director of Operations, Jay Byer-Kopensky, has been working with all of our companies to make sure that there are plans in place. He's also been working with me and with all of our companies to remove chairs. I think Jen Wagner also made a comment on that they've also taken chairs out from their conference rooms. It's a conference room where you usually pack in 15 to 20 people, is one of the ones we have, and you don't want to do that. So maybe 6 around the room. And I think that's what we find in a lot of public spaces, is that capacity is much more limited, but most people are willing to work with you on that. They understand that they don't really want to get in a close connected situation yet.
Yeah, and Jen, thanks for that comment. That's right on it. The compliance part, like sustaining this, and I'm sure you're feeling this a bit too, Diane. I'm feeling some of the kind of COVID fatigue, if you will, and my hands also are feeling it. You know, how are you all managing through that and kind of keeping up the consistency of that compliance, of keeping the spacing, keeping the cleaning going?
First, I actually want to give a shout out to a group called All Hands Minnesota. They are a group of distillery companies, Brother Justice, Tattersall, and Du Nord Craft Spirits, that banded together, realizing that there wasn't a market for the amazing spirits that they presented, and they pivoted to making hand sanitizer. So big shout out to them, and we've been using them to supply our building with extra hand sanitizer. I think the second piece to your comment, Frank, is how do you keep from COVID fatigue? It's day after day. So I think we're all tired. We're all hoping for a return to normal, but I think there's a recognition this is going to be our state of normal for much longer than we'd like. From our perspective, keeping up with the latest executive orders, making sure that we understand the latest guidance from the Minnesota Department of Health on what we can do and how we can protect it. Supplies, I think supply chain has really been a key aspect for all of us. Trying to find hand sanitizer back in March was a challenge. It's still not simple, which is why, again, thank you, All Hands Minnesota. You guys are awesome. But planning ahead of time so that we have the supplies in place that we need to keep our companies safe has been a key part of it. So the supply chain element, the outreach, the sourcing of things that we don't normally have on hand, like extra masks, for example.
Yeah, and I'll ask this question of the attendees as well. So you said the hand sanitizer back in March was the challenge to get a hold of. I hear you there.
Yeah.
When you think about the next couple of months, so maybe rest of this year into first quarter next year, what are the kinds of things that you're anticipating as far as like maybe supplies that you might need to get that you didn't before, or further changes you have to make? Do you have any thoughts of, where you might be going?
Yeah, so I think masks are probably one of the key sources, especially now with the statewide mask requirement. One of the things I like about the executive order is the focus on support rather than enforcement, if that makes sense. So what I would much rather do if someone comes into UEL is say, we noticed that you don't have your mask with you. We'd like to offer you a complimentary one for the time that you're with us, rather than saying, don't come into my building, you don't have a mask on. So it's much more about enabling, I think, rather than enforcing, and I think that's the position we'd like to be in. So yes, we'll be placing some additional orders. Disposable masks are unfortunately not as effective as usually the 2-ply or multi-layer cloth masks, but we don't really have a means in which to wash cloth masks. So I think that the disposable masks will be what we offer to people rather than offering a permanent mask to them. I will actually contrast that with a visit that my family needed to make to the AT&T store a few weeks ago, where they walked in and they'd left their masks in the car, and the very nice individual said, we'd like to offer you these 2 cloth masks free of charge, and hope that you wear them while you're in our store. So that type of approach, but I think anticipating that we'll be sourcing more disposable masks. They will not be N95 masks because we really do want to reserve those for our healthcare personnel. I think the other thing we anticipate is cleaning supplies. We've reverted to using more bleach than we'd like to, but it's a safe and effective way of sanitizing and cleaning our spaces. And then hand sanitizer, extra cloths and cleaning supplies, and also supplies for our contract employees who clean the building to make sure that they're able to stay safe. We want to make sure they have the tools that they need as well.
And I'll make a quick plug. I got to say, like, masks are a really great branding opportunity for your employee. Yeah. Like Medical Alley, we did really nice, like 3-layer cloth ones, Medical Alley Association on them for the staff. I think it's going to be the hot marketing, like tchotchke for 21. So just putting that out there for everyone.
Yeah, I'll put in another plug for a local company called Podium Ware. And Podium Ware has also pivoted to making masks during the time they're manufactured in St. Paul. And they've been incredibly responsive. Had to place a second order for masks from them, showed up in like a day and a half. It's just amazing. But they do both 1-ply and 2-ply. They've got kind of themes for April, May, and June, and then some slightly disturbing cat-themed masks that I don't think I want to wear, but I think they're pretty cool. They will also work with companies on doing individual branded masks if you want to.
I got to give a lot of credit to the small business community in Minnesota that's really responded, and the big business community as well that's responded, making sure we have the resources we need for this. Maybe last question I'll ask of you and ask this of the audience as well. Has this slowed down your work at all? Has it sped up your work? Like, we've had all these kind of burdens placed on us as a society this year. How is UEL doing? How does it feel? Are you still making forward progress?
So I would actually say that our work has sped up rather than slowing down. And I think for most of the companies that I've talked with, it's been binary. It's been everything has slowed down and they're not sure how things are going to work to normal, or, oh my gosh, we're busy all the time. How did we manage before this? UEL at the same time last year had 38 companies. We now have 63. If you think about that scale of growth, a good portion of it was our new addition, but also a good portion was some of the things that we put in place to make our community more welcoming to entrepreneurs. And those are the things that we not only can't let up on, but don't want to let up on. Those are the things that really make it worthwhile to be part of our community. So I would say COVID-19 preparedness has been a necessary thing to add on to the work that we're doing, and absolutely vital to keep people safe. But no, things are not slowing down. And if you think about the team that UEL serves, we serve the biotech and medtech community, as well as the food and agriculture and healthcare communities, anyone who needs lab space. It's biotech and pharma, and that's an extraordinarily growing community right now with the need for diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics. So if anything, I wish that I had more lab space to offer people, but managing what we have and managing and staying in touch with the community that's absolutely vital.
I think that's a really good place to wrap up the discussion, and I'll echo it and say I'm thankful every day that I get to work with this community, but especially right now, like the work that the UEL tenants is doing, that UEL is doing, and that those of you who are on this call are doing every day. You know, this pandemic is changing the world. I think it would be a lot worse if it wasn't for the companies that make up this amazing community. So I want to say, Diane, thank you for sharing your perspective and the experiences of UEL companies. Attendees, thank you for taking some time out of your day and spending it with your friendly association. And for those of you that are members, thank you for being members and supporting our work. Have a good rest of your day. See you later.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been an honor to be part of this. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me personally.
Thank you. All right, folks, have a good one.